On today's show, the Cleveland Cavaliers have a new head coach. Kenny Atkinson's the guy, and I think that's good for what this team needs to do offensively.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can find the show wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Be sure to leave a 5-star review, write a review as well. You can also watch the show on YouTube, the Locked On Cavs YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed. Give this video a thumbs up. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show also brought to you by FanDuel. Head on over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to make sure that you get the most out of your summer. Emergency episode. The Cavs are hiring Kenny Atkinson. He's the guy, the next head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers, replacing JB Bickerstaff. It has been about a month since Bickerstaff was relieved of his duties. The Cavs finally got their guy. There's a lot to dive into, but I think the first thing that is worth bringing up is Kenny Atkinson is an offensive-minded coach. He is someone that I do believe, given his track record, given his history, I do believe will help to elevate this team offensively. And I think that is the second most important thing that needed to happen as part of this coaching search. And the first most important thing was having Donovan Mitchell sign off on whoever the Cavs were going to hire. It certainly sounds like Mitchell is on board with this. And I think Atkinson's offensive prowess, what he's done, and the thing that I look at when I'm speaking about that is some of those early Brooklyn Nets teams. Yeah, it didn't work with him with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving once those guys got there. I'm not sure that there was a coach in the NBA that it was going to work with at first, especially given everything that happened there. And I know part of the reason why Atkinson ultimately left that job was because he wanted to start Jarrett Allen instead of DeAndre Jordan, which was the right decision to be making at that point. When I look at Kenny Atkinson's hire in Brooklyn, or his tenure in Brooklyn, I should say, excuse me, I look at how he was able to get the most out of D'Angelo Russell. I don't think D'Angelo Russell is all that good. I think he's a fine NBA player, but I don't think he's great. I don't think he's special. I think he's incredibly streaky and inconsistent. Kenny Atkinson helped him to play at an all-star level. Now, Atkinson doesn't deserve all that credit. You have to give credit where it's due to the actual player because he's the guy that's going out on the floor, bouncing the ball, putting it in the basket. But Atkinson was able to put him in a position to where he was the best player on a playoff team. He was an all-star. That hasn't been anything that's been close to being recreated since for D'Angelo Russell. His time in Golden State wasn't very good. His time in Minnesota, also not great. With the Lakers, incredibly up and down. Atkinson got the most out of him. Now, if you put that version of D'Angelo Russell on this Cavs team, where does he rank amongst guards? I think he's probably the third best guard. We know Donovan Mitchell is better than him. That's not really a discussion. And I certainly believe Darius Garland is better than that version of D'Angelo Russell as well. So I'm very hopeful that Atkinson can be the guy that will get the most out of this Cavs backcourt if it is kept together. I'm very hopeful for that to be the case. One of the other things I really like about Atkinson is the fact that he has experience in a great organization. Culturally, what he built in Brooklyn, I thought was awesome. And I think Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving did a lot to tear down that culture. Like when those two arrived on July 1st that was 2019. When those two arrived in Brooklyn, July 1st, 2019, that culture dramatically changed. It stopped being Kenny Atkinson's culture and it started being the culture of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And that was obviously not for the better. I think that's a very fair thing to say. But I do think the Golden State Warriors have had one of the best cultures in basketball. I do. And the fact that Atkinson has been there for the last several years, won a title as the lead assistant to Steve Kerr, and has accumulated that experience, I think is a really good sign for whether it was going to be in Cleveland or whether it was going to be somewhere else. I think that was a really good thing for him to grow as a coach, to become a better head coach. That's one of the things that you do when you are trying to improve yourself as a coach. You go find a winning organization and be part of that. Atkinson doing that, I think, is a really good thing. I do. That is something that I think should excite Cavs fans. Now, the biggest part of this, and there was a report from The Athletic that came out today. There's a couple things that, and I should let you know, it is 10:45 as I'm recording this right now. So this is very fresh. I'm still digesting this news. I'm still sort of piecing it all together, as I'm sure you are as you're listening to this. There are a couple of things in that report from The Athletic that are worth bringing up. One is, first and foremost, the Donovan Mitchell situation, which the Cavs have been for a long time very confident that Donovan would sign an extension and stay in Cleveland. This extension doesn't mean he's going to be a member of the Cavs forever. It doesn't mean he's going to retire in Cleveland. But it means that there is at least some short-term security, I think, on the way. They remain very confident that he will sign this extension. And part of that confidence is knowing that he is signing off on whoever the next head coach of the Cavs is. Whether it was James Borrego or whether it was Kenny Atkinson, I'm not sure if he signed off on any other candidates. But with those two certainly being the main two candidates, you have to feel pretty good about Donovan Mitchell signing a contract extension with the Cavs today. As this hire comes out, that should be the first thing you think of. After that, we can talk about what Atkinson can do for the offense, what Atkinson can do because he's got experience around a great organization. We can talk about all those things afterwards. But first and foremost, the fact that Donovan Mitchell signing off on this, according to a ton of reports, Donovan Mitchell signing off on Kenny Atkinson being the next head coach of the Cavs should make you feel really, really good about his standing in Cleveland and the chances of him signing that contract extension. The report was that it's going to be the 4-year extension worth over $200 million that's offered to Mitchell. We will see if that's the amount of years he wants to sign for. I know it's been reported at other places that he might be interested in a little bit of a shorter term contract extension so he can hit the open market when he reaches 10 years of service time and really get an even bigger payday. We will see what happens there. But I think you should feel really good about Donovan Mitchell today, not only because of that, but also because I think that Atkinson is a coach that can get the most out of Donovan Mitchell. If he was able to get the most out of D'Angelo Russell, what's Donovan Mitchell going to, who is a far, far superior player, what is Donovan Mitchell going to look like under Atkinson? I think that is a very exciting thing to find out. And I think there are some exciting things about Darius Garland too, to bring up here. Now, Garland's status as a member of the Cavs, given some of the reporting that has come out long term, is a little bit more murky, I think, just because, there is the possibility that Rich Paul and Clutch Sports go to Kobe Altman, the Cavs president of basketball operations, and say, hey, we would like to see Darius move to another situation. So you can't necessarily count on him for sure being on this roster. But I'm not sure that there are many guys out there that I would rather see help to rehabilitate Darius Garland's game than Kenny Atkinson. I think that what he's done with guards and the guards that he has been around, because I've not even mentioned Steph Curry, and he's been, the lead assistant in Golden State with Steph Curry there for the last couple of years, for the last few years. I would have to think a lot of learning for Kenny Atkinson came from that situation. A lot of it. I'm not sure how many coaches out there I would rather see help elevate Darius Garland back to all-star form than Kenny Atkinson. It's not a very long list. When this coaching search started, Kenny Atkinson was the guy I wanted. I wavered a little bit and I sort of flipped to James Borrego. And I still think Borrego would have been a fantastic hire had they made it. But I think that because of what he's done with guards, particularly guards that are not huge, right? Like Steph Curry is 6'2", not a big guard. And I know he's a 1 of 1, but he's not a big guard. What he's done and who he's been around, I think is a great sign for getting the most out of Darius Garland, getting him back to all-star form, for getting the most out of Donovan Mitchell, keeping him at an all-NBA level, maybe even a little bit higher. And then what the biggest issue with JB Bickerstaff was the offense. Defensively, this team was awesome. I don't expect that to change under Kenny Atkinson. We don't know what the rest of his staff is going to look like, obviously, but the bones of a really good defense, just from roster construction in Cleveland, are there. I think at this point, a good defense will have less to do with coaching and more to do with who is playing. I think the offensive stuff, because there are a lot of talented guys offensively, there are on this roster. Getting the most out of those guys, that's what I think Kenny Atkinson needs to do. And I think that is going to be the biggest change that we see from last year's Cavs and the JB Bickerstaff era Cavs to this year's Cavs and the next era of Cavaliers basketball. I've got one more thing I want to hit on. We know that Borrego was the leader in the clubhouse, it felt like, for the majority of this search. According to The Athletic, something changed. There was a meeting that flipped things. We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Like, hey, maybe hiring Kenny Atkinson for the Cavs is a huge win for that franchise. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So the other thing that came out in that report from The Athletic was that there was a meeting between the front office and Cavs governor, owner, whatever you want to call him, Dan Gilbert. And historically, when Dan has been healthy, and he has gone through some very serious health issues over the last several years and was not as involved with the day-to-day direction of the Cavs while he was recovering from that stuff. But Dan, it does seem, is much more back in the fold, has a much stronger voice in the way things are going. And I think that this is a result of that, partially at least. I don't think that Kenny Atkinson is being hired solely because that's the guy Dan Gilbert wanted, but I do think that's part of it. There was a report that came out that Tom Izzo, someone who in the past Dan has tried to hire, Izzo, of course, head coach of the Michigan State University basketball team, Izzo, someone that Dan has tried to hire during previous coaching searches. Way back in the day, he was not a candidate for this search at any point in time. But in previous searches, he certainly was someone that the Cavs were interested in. There was a report that came out that Izzo gave his vote of confidence to Atkinson, and that is something that Gilbert certainly listened to. If that's true, I think that's fine. Because this isn't some... And I know in the past, when Dan has been involved in these hires, they've not gone well. Right? Like you think of David Blatt, which is a little unfair because I don't know what David Blatt would have looked like as an NBA coach if he would have coached a team that didn't have LeBron and wasn't immediately expected to compete for championships. But it also, in hindsight, was a bad hire. John Beilein was a very bad hire. There's no argument about that. And Dan was certainly involved in each of those too. But both of those guys were hires from out of left field, so to speak, where they weren't guys that were on the radar of many NBA teams. They weren't in consideration for a ton of other jobs. Like they weren't the prototypical NBA coach. They were not a safe choice to make. They were bold, they were gambles, and those gambles did not pay off. So I understand trepidation that people might have when Dan Gilbert gets involved in these hires. I get it. I totally understand that. But I don't think you should feel that way with this hire. Because Kenny Atkinson is an established coach. He's a coach that has had success in the NBA. He is someone that has been thought of for several other job openings. Think back to when James Borrego was let go by the Charlotte Hornets, which never should have happened. When Borrego was let go, Atkinson went through the interview process there and was actually offered the job and turned it down. So it's not as if he is someone that is, one, obviously this is not his first go at it as a head coach in the NBA, which is very important. You can't say that about the past two head coaching hires that were not elevated from within the staff. So that, so that takes out Ty Lue, that takes out JB Bickerstaff. You can't say that about this hire because Atkinson has the requisite experience. I wonder how this would look if the Cavs just last week would have hired Atkinson and that report about Dan Gilbert's involvement not coming out. I wonder if that changes the opinion of some people, because I think it's worth looking at this through that lens. I do. Because if you look at it through that lens, it changes things. Kenny Atkinson is still the same coach. He's still the same candidate. He still has the same experiences. He's still someone that can elevate the offense. So don't allow the involvement of the owner to really strongly sway your opinion of this. If you weren't a Kenny Atkinson guy 10 days ago, or a Kenny Atkinson person 10 days ago, because everyone can have these opinions, if you were not a person that was wanting to see him hired, that's fine. That opinion shouldn't change. And we'll see if you were right or wrong in due time. But I don't think that this opinion should be one that is clouded by the involvement of Dan Gilbert. I don't. I think that this is an opinion that if you liked Kenny Atkinson, Dan Gilbert's involvement now isn't a reason to say, you know what, maybe I was wrong. And I also don't think it's a reason to flip, because Kenny Atkinson is a good coach. We'll see where this goes. I think that he will be a good offensive coach for this team. I will have more thoughts later on. This is an emergency episode. I just wanted to get, 15 to 20 minutes talking about this so you guys could get my immediate thoughts. I will have a full Locked On Cavs episode coming out later tonight. It'll be up on YouTube first. It'll hit the podcast feed tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. I will have more complete thoughts. I may try and line up a guest and just really talk through this Kenny Atkinson hire. But I wanted to put together an emergency episode of Locked On Cavs before I really digested everything in totality. So stay tuned for that. But today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. We all love sports. I don't want sports to stop. The playoffs are winding down. They're gone in basketball. But that doesn't mean that sports are gone. There's still plenty going on, and FanDuel has you covered because they let the sports keep going whenever you want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets at any time, and you can make them whenever you're in the mood. Talked about on today's earlier show, the full Locked On Cavs for today, Monday, as I record this, the Guardians at plus 2,200. Man, I've been watching a lot of Cleveland Guardians baseball. They just swept the Blue Jays this past weekend. They have a huge series starting in Baltimore tonight, and then they go to Kansas City for 4 games. This is a huge week. They're plus 2,200 to win the World Series right now. Let's say they keep up this hot streak. They go, 5-2 this week. Those odds might plummet a little bit. You might not be able to give them plus 2,200. Might be down to, plus 1,800. So maybe jump on them now because you think the Guardians are going to win the World Series like I do. FanDuel is the place to do that at. Head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, because this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. So there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So, like I said, I will have a full Locked On Cavs episode coming up late tonight. I may try and get a guest, but we will talk through this Kenny Atkinson hire. Also, if you have any questions about Atkinson, drop them in the comments, tweet them at me at RealDCunningham. And I will try and carve out some time on the full episode of Locked On Cavs that comes out later today to answer some of those questions. Again, thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. This episode might be your second listen of the day. Very much appreciate that. You can find the show wherever you get your podcast. If you're not subscribed, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast. Also, head on over to our YouTube page. You can watch me record this show every day in 4K on a great iPhone camera. Locked On Cavs YouTube channel. If you're watching this video, give it a thumbs up if you haven't already. Subscribe to Locked On Cavs, and I will talk to you coming up a little bit later with so much more on the Cavs hiring Kenny Atkinson as their next head coach.